Today I'm going to tell the story of a guy. He believed in love, but one day everything fell apart in an instant. It's a story about how easy it is to lose something that seemed eternal. Perhaps in it you'll recognize not only his pain, but also your own fears. Let's begin. I take another sip of beer, enjoying the warm evening air. Down below, the city is alive with people rushing home from work, couples walking, holding hands, children playing in the playground. I feel a strange connection to all these strangers. Maybe it's because right now, in this moment, I feel love for the whole world. Tomorrow is the big day. I will finally pick up our wedding rings from the jewelry store. I envision what they will look like. Simple, elegant, with a small diamond sparkling like Lane's eyes when she laughs. I can't wait to show them to her tomorrow night. The door to the apartment opens and I hear familiar footsteps. Lane is home. My heart, as it always does, starts beating a little faster. "Frank, are you home?" Her voice sounds a little tired, but still beautiful. "On the balcony, love," I reply. After a moment, she comes out to me, and once again I'm struck by how beautiful she is. Even after a long day at work, with disheveled hair and no makeup, she's the most beautiful woman in the world. Lane walks over to me, and I pull her into my lap. She bumps her nose against my neck, and I feel the tension leave her body. "Rough day?" I ask, gently stroking her back. She mumbles. "The shelter brought in a new batch of puppies. It's been a lot of work, but I'm home with you now and everything's okay." I kiss the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. "I have a big day tomorrow," I say with a smile. She lifts her head, curiosity lighting up in her eyes. "Really? What kind of day?" I smile even wider. "It's a surprise. You'll find out tomorrow night." Lane pouts her lips in feigned offense, but I can see the sparks of amusement in her eyes. "All right then. I'll look forward to it." We sit on the balcony, hugging and admiring the sunset. I think about our future, about the life we'll build together, about the house we'll buy, about the children we'll probably have, the trips we'll take, about all the joys and hardships that await us. And I know I'm ready for anything with Lane by my side. Together we can overcome any obstacle, face any challenge. Our love is stronger than anything. I hug Lane tighter, grateful for this moment, for our love, for everything we have. Life is beautiful, and I know the best is yet to come. If only I had known how soon things would change. If only I could have foreseen that fate was preparing a cruel test for me. But in that moment, on the balcony, with Lane in my arms, I was absolutely happy and confident about our future. I didn't know that tomorrow would be the beginning of the end. I didn't know that these happy moments would soon turn into bitter memories of paradise lost. I didn't know that the person I loved most in the world would betray me at the most difficult moment. But that knowledge came later, and now was just this moment. A moment of pure, untainted happiness, and I was enjoying it, unaware of the storm that was about to hit my life. I remember that day with merciless clarity. Every detail, every sound, every smell is etched into my memory as if carved in stone. It was an ordinary Tuesday, unremarkable. I was driving home from work, daydreaming about my upcoming evening with Lane. We planned to discuss the details of our wedding, which was to take place in 3 months. Lane, even now, years later, her name evokes a storm of emotions in me. Love, pain, anger, longing, all mixed into a toxic cocktail that makes my heart clench. But then, on that fateful Tuesday, I was filled with nothing but love and hope for the future. I remember smiling at the thought of how excited she would be when I showed her the engagement rings I'd picked up from the jewelry store on my lunch hour. They were perfect, simple, elegant, with a small diamond sparkling like her eyes when she laughed. And then, a bright headlight, the deafening screech of brakes, the crunch of metal and glass, and darkness. I don't remember the moment of impact. Doctors say it's normal. The brain protects itself by blocking out traumatic memories. Sometimes I wonder why it can't block out everything that happened afterwards. Why am I forced to relive over and over again every second of the hell my life has become? The first thing I remember after the accident is the pain. an all-consuming, unbearable pain that permeated every cell in my body. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. Even breathing was excruciating. I heard voices around me, fidgety movements, the beeping of some devices. But it all seemed distant, unreal. Only the pain was real. I don't know how long it was before I could open my eyes. Maybe hours, maybe days. When I finally did, the first thing I saw was the white hospital ceiling, and then Lane's face. She was sitting next to my bed, holding my hand. Her eyes were red from crying, her hair mussed. She looked exhausted, but when our gazes met, her face lit up with a smile. "Frank, thank God you're awake. I was so afraid. The doctor said, 'Oh, Frank.'" She leaned in to kiss me, but I saw her hesitate for a moment. Her eyes widened, something flashed in them. Fear? Disgust? I didn't realize what it was then. Then I was just glad to see her, to feel her hand in mine. I tried to speak, but all I got out of my throat was a croak. Lane brought a glass of water to my lips. "Shh. Don't try to talk. You need to rest. You were in a serious accident, Frank. You've been unconscious for almost a week. The doctors, they weren't sure you'd make it." Her voice shook, her eyes filling with tears again. I squeezed her hand, trying to comfort her. I wanted to tell her that everything would be okay, that we'd make it through this. But the words stuck in my throat, and not just because of the physical pain. Because in that moment, I saw my reflection in the metal surface of the bedside table, and what I saw made me freeze with horror. My face. It was disfigured almost beyond recognition. Deep scars crisscrossed my forehead and cheeks. My right eye was almost completely swollen shut, and my nose was turned sideways. My lips, broken and swollen, were curved in a grotesque grimace. I closed my eyes, unable to look at it. But even with my eyes closed, I could feel Lane's gaze on me. A look that read shock, pity, and something else. Something that made my heart clench with a premonition of trouble. But I pushed those thoughts away. Lane loves me, I told myself. We'll get through this together. We'll get married like we planned. We'll live happily ever after, just like in the fairy tales. God, how naive I was. The next few weeks were a blur. Endless exams, dressings, IVs, the pain now subsiding under the influence of medication, then flaring up with renewed vigor, and the constant, oppressive realization of how much my life had changed. Lane came every day. She sat next to me, held my hand, told me the news. But something had changed. Her smile became strained, a shadow in her eyes. She tried not to look at my face, and when she did, I saw in her gaze a mixture of pity and disgust. I tried to convince myself that it was the shock, that she just needed time to adjust. But deep down inside, I felt like I was losing her. Every day she became more and more distant, her visits shorter and shorter. And then the day came. The day that forever divided my life into before and afters. Lane arrived later than usual. She looked pale, shadows under her eyes. She sat down next to my bed, but didn't take my hand as she usually did. "Frank," she said quietly, not looking me in the eye, "we need to talk." In that moment, I realized that my worst fears were becoming a reality, but I was still clinging to hope like a drowning man to a straw. I don't know how to say this," she continued, her voice shaking. "I've tried, Frank. I really have tried. But I can't. I can't be with you, not like this. Not after—" She stopped talking. But I didn't need her to finish her sentence. I knew what she meant. Not after I was a freak. "Lane!" I wheezed, my voice sounding foreign even to myself. "Please, we can get through this, together. I'm still me. I still love you." She finally looked up at me, and I saw tears in her eyes. But behind those tears was a determination that broke my heart. "I'm sorry, Frank. I'm really sorry. But I can't. It's too much. You've changed too much. I can't be with you. I can't look at you and not remember. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She stood up, cast one last look at me, and walked quickly out of the room. And I was left lying there, feeling my life crumble into shards. At that moment, I realized that I had lost more than just my face. I had lost the love of my life, my future, my dreams. Everything I'd planned, everything I'd hoped for was gone with Lane. And for the first time since the accident, I regretted surviving. The days after Lane's passing merged into an endless string of pain and despair. The physical pain of my injuries seemed insignificant compared to the agony that tore at my soul. Every morning I woke up with the hope that it was all just a nightmare, and every morning reality came crashing down on me with renewed vigor. I lay in my hospital room, staring at the ceiling, replaying our last conversation with Lane over and over in my head. Every word she'd said, every gesture, every look, it all cut into my memory like acid, eating away at the remnants of my self-esteem. "You've changed too much," she said. But had I changed? Is a person only their appearance? Did all our years together, all the moments of happiness and love we'd shared, mean nothing in the face of a few scars? I tried to find an excuse for her action, tried to understand. Maybe she was in shock. Maybe she just needed time to adjust. But deep down, I knew the truth. Lane didn't leave because she was having a hard time. She left because she didn't want to be with me anymore. Because I was no longer the handsome, successful man she had come to love. I was a burden, a reminder of the tragedy, and she chose to get rid of that reminder. The nurses and doctors tried to console me, saying that everything would get better, that I would find someone else. But their words seemed empty and meaningless. How could I find someone else? Who would want to be with such a freak? I started avoiding mirrors and any reflective surfaces. Every time I saw my disfigured face, panic gripped me. "This isn't me," my mind screamed. It couldn't be me. But it was me. A new, horrible version of me that I couldn't accept. Nights I lay awake, remembering every moment of my and Lane's life. Our first meeting in college, our first date, our first kiss. The moment I proposed to her and the happy tears in her eyes when she said yes. All these memories that once brought joy were now causing unbearable pain. I remembered how we planned our wedding, how we dreamed of the future, about the house we would buy, about the children we would have, the trips we'd take together. All of those dreams have now turned to ashes, scattered by the winds of betrayal. Sometimes I felt rage. I wanted to scream, to break things, to hurt. Myself or others, it didn't matter. How could she do this to me? After all we'd been through together, after all the vows of eternal love? In sickness and in health, the wedding vows say. But Lane couldn't even stand that test. At other times, I was hit by a wave of despair so strong I couldn't breathe. I lay there, choking back sobs, feeling my heart being torn apart. Nurses came running at the sound of the monitor showing a rapid heartbeat, administering a sedative. But no drug could take away the pain in my soul. As the days passed, I sank deeper and deeper into the abyss of depression. I stopped eating, refused treatments, ignored the doctors' and nurses' attempts to talk to me. Why should I get better? Why should I go on living? I had nothing left. My parents came every day, trying to support me, to get me out of this state. But I saw the pain and pity in their eyes. I saw them flinch when they looked at my face, even though they tried to hide it. Their presence only heightened my sense of worthlessness and ugliness. One day when I was particularly depressed, my mom brought me a photo album. "Look at it, Frank," she said softly. "Remember how many wonderful moments you had. Life isn't over. You can still be happy." I picked up the album with shaky hands. There was a happy face looking back at me from the pictures. My old face. Me at graduation. Me at my first job. Me and Lane on the beach, tanned and smiling. Me and Lane on our engagement day. I slammed the album shut and flung it away. "That's not me!" I screamed. "That man is dead! He died in that accident!" Mom cried, and I felt a prick of guilt. I was hurting everyone around me. Maybe everyone would be better off without me? That thought began to haunt me. At first, it was just a whisper in the back of my mind. But with each passing day, it grew louder. Why go on living? Why continue this miserable existence? I began to contemplate ways to end my life. Maybe an overdose of medication? Or throw myself out the window? Every time the nurse brought the pills, I thought about hiding them under my tongue and building up enough for a lethal dose. But something stopped me. Maybe cowardice. Maybe the faint hope that things could still change. Or maybe the thought of parents who didn't deserve such pain. One day, when these thoughts became particularly intrusive, a new doctor came into my room. He was an older man with kind eyes and a gray beard. He sat down next to my bed and was silent for a long time, just looking at me. "You know, son," he finally said, "I see a lot of pain in your eyes, and not just physical." I turned away, not wanting to continue this conversation, but he didn't walk away. "I've seen a lot of patients who have gone through what you've gone through," he continued. "Many of them thought their life was over. But you know what? For many, it was just the beginning." I hummed. "The beginning of what? A life of being a freak? A life where everyone looks at you with disgust or pity?" He shook his head. "The beginning of a new life. A life where you can become stronger than you've ever been. Where you can find meaning and purpose you didn't even know you had." I looked at him in disbelief. "Is that what you tell everyone? You think these platitudes can help?" He smiled. "No, not to everyone. Only those in whom I see strength. And I see great strength in you, Frank, even if you don't see it yourself yet." He stood up and headed for the door, but turned around before he left. "Think about this, Frank. You've lost a lot of things. But what can you gain? Who can you become now that all the masks have been ripped off?" Those words stuck in my head. I couldn't stop thinking them, even when I wanted to. Who can I become? Do I have a future? For the first time in a long time, I felt something other than pain and despair. It wasn't hope, no, more like a faint curiosity. Maybe this tragedy could actually lead to something new? But even that spark was smothered when I received a letter a few days later, from Lane. The letter from Lane lay on my bedside table like a bomb ready to explode at any moment. I stared at the envelope, hesitant to open it. Part of me desperately wanted to know what she'd written. Maybe she'd changed her mind? Maybe she realized she'd made a mistake. But another part of me, the part that had already begun to come to terms with the loss, was afraid that the contents of the letter would finally destroy me. In the end, curiosity won out. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and began to read. "Dear Frank, I've been thinking for a long time whether I should write this letter. Maybe it would have been better to just disappear from your life without nursing old wounds. But I feel I owe you an explanation. You deserve it. First of all, I want you to know that I never meant to hurt you. What happened is a terrible tragedy, and I'm so sorry you have to go through it. But I can't lie to you or to myself. I'm not the strong woman you thought I was. I can't be there for you. I can't support you the way you deserve. Every time I look at you, I see more than just your scars. I see my own weakness and selfishness. I know that my leaving has hurt you, maybe even more than the accident itself. And for that, I will never forgive myself. But I believe that in the long run, it's better for both of us. You deserve someone who will love you unconditionally, who can see your inner beauty even when the outer has changed. And I'm not that person. I'm giving you your ring back. It's as beautiful as the life we planned. But that life is in the past. We have to go our separate ways now. I hope that someday you can forgive me. And I hope even more that you'll find the strength to move on. You're an amazing man, Frank. Don't let my weakness or someone else's prejudices make you think otherwise. Goodbye, Lane." I reread the letter over and over until the words began to blur in front of my eyes. Each sentence was like a knife stabbing open barely healed wounds. Did she call it an explanation? An excuse? Did she think these words about my inner beauty would somehow ease the pain of betrayal? I crumpled the letter in my fist, feeling a wave of rage rising inside. How dare she? How dare she write about my strength when she herself was so weak? How dare she speak of unconditional love when her own love has proven to be so conditional? "I am not the strong woman you thought I was," she wrote. "But isn't love about being strong together? Isn't that what a partnership is all about? Supporting each other in times of need?" I looked at the ring that had fallen out of the envelope. It lay on the hospital sheet, glistening in the setting sun. A symbol of promises that turned out to be empty, a symbol of a future that no longer existed. At that moment, something in me broke completely. All the hopes I still cherished in the back of my mind crumbled to dust. Lane wasn't coming back. Our love that I thought would last forever was fragile and shallow. Everything I believed in turned out to be a lie. I grabbed the ring and threw it as hard as I could at the wall. It bounced off and rolled under the bed. Let it stay there, I thought, buried and forgotten, like all my dreams and hopes. The next days passed like a blur. I refused to eat, ignored the doctors and nurses. I just lay staring at the ceiling, feeling the life drain out of me with every breath. The doctors talked about depression, suggested antidepressants and therapy. But what therapy can help when your soul is torn apart? What pills could glue a broken heart back together? My parents tried to reach out to me, but I shut them out with a wall of silence. I could see the pain in their eyes, but I couldn't bring myself to worry about it. My own pain swallowed me whole, leaving no room for anything else. On nights when the hospital quieted down, I lay awake, replaying every moment of my relationship with Lane in my head. Every smile, every kiss, every I love you. Were there signs I'd missed? Were there moments when I could see her true face? Or was she just playing the part of the loving bride perfectly until circumstances forced the truth to be revealed? I thought about the future we had planned, about the house we wanted to buy, about the children we dreamed of having. It all seemed like a cruel joke of fate now. How could I have been so naive? How could I have believed I deserved such happiness? Gradually, pain and despair gave way to anger. I was angry at Lane for betraying me, angry at fate for being so cruel to me. But most of all, I was angry at myself for being so weak, so dependent on someone else's love, for letting one man become the center of my universe. That anger became my fuel. It kept me getting up in the morning, going through excruciating rehab. I didn't want to get better for the future anymore. I wanted to get stronger despite everyone, to spite Lane, to spite fate, to spite the world that seemed to be turning against me. Weeks passed. I was slowly recovering physically, but inside I was hardening more and more. Every glance in the mirror, every shocked look from a visitor or new doctor increased my bitterness. One day, as I waddled down the hallway, leaning on a walker, I heard two nurses talking. "Poor fellow," said one. "So young and your life is already over." "Yes," replied the other. "Who would want to be with one like that? His fiancée did right to leave. Why ruin his life?" They didn't know what I was hearing, but their words confirmed everything I'd been thinking all these weeks. To the world, I was no longer a person. I was an object of pity, a monster to be kept away from. That day, I made a decision. I would no longer be the victim. I would no longer be the Frank that everyone knew and loved. That Frank died in that accident. Someone new was born, fierce, angry at the world, not believing in love and kindness. When it was time to be discharged from the hospital, I refused to go back to my parents. Instead, I found a small apartment on the outskirts of town. I didn't want to see anyone, didn't want to socialize with anyone. The world rejected me, and I rejected the world. I started working remotely, spending my days in front of a computer. I wandered the deserted streets at night, enjoying the loneliness and the darkness that hid my scars. I started drinking. First a little to dull the pain, then more and more. My parents tried to reach out to me, but I pushed them away. Friends called and wrote, but I ignored their messages. Gradually, the calls became less frequent. The messages stopped coming. I was left alone, alone with my pain and bitterness. Months passed. I existed, but I didn't live. Every day was the same as the last. Work, alcohol, loneliness. I convinced myself that I enjoyed it, that I didn't need anyone. And then, almost a year after the accident, I saw Lane again. It was at the supermarket. I walked in late at night, hoping to avoid the crowds. And suddenly, as I turned the corner, I came face to face with her. She had changed. She'd lost weight. Her hair was graying. But she was still beautiful, the kind of beauty that had once made my heart swoon. We froze, looking at each other. I saw the way her eyes widened, the way she recoiled. And then I noticed the ring on her finger, and the man who approached her, holding a package of diapers. "Honey, did you pick out the milk?" he asked, not noticing me. Lane blinked, shifting her gaze from me to him. "Yes," she muttered. "Let's get out of here." She practically dragged him away without once looking back. And I was left standing there, feeling a wave of nausea rising inside. When I got home, I collapsed on the floor in the hallway. I was shaking. The room was spinning before my eyes. The image of Lane with her new husband, happy, with a baby, was too much. I crawled to the cabinet where I kept the bottle of whiskey. With shaky hands, I opened it and began to drink straight from my throat. The alcohol burned my throat, but I didn't stop until the bottle was half empty. In an alcoholic haze, I waddled to the bathroom. I stared bleary-eyed at my reflection in the mirror. The scars seemed to ripple in the dim light of the lamp. The distorted face stared back at me with disgust and hatred. "That's how it ended," I muttered to my reflection. "She's happy. And you? You're a pathetic semblance of a human being." I slammed my fist into the mirror. It cracked, shards spilling into the sink. Blood from my cut hand dripped onto the white porcelain, but I barely noticed the pain. At that moment, I realized I couldn't live like this anymore. I couldn't continue this miserable existence full of pain and loneliness. I made a decision. Staggering, I went to the bedroom. I took out a bottle of sleeping pills from the nightstand that I kept for emergencies. Scooped the pills into the palm of my hand. "That's it," I whispered. "End of story." I brought the pills up to my mouth. At the last moment, as the pills were about to touch my lips, the phone rang. I froze, not knowing what to do. The ringing continued, insistently breaking the silence of the apartment. Instinctively, without realizing why, I reached for the phone. "Frank? Frank, are you there?" My mother's voice, trembling with excitement, broke into my consciousness. "Frank, please answer it." "Mom?" I wheezed, surprised at how foreign my own voice seemed. "Oh, thank God!" she exhaled. "Frank, I don't know why, but I had a terrible feeling. I should have called. Are you all right?" I looked at the pills in my hand. Was I okay? Of course I wasn't. I hadn't been okay in a long time. "Yes, Mom," I lied. "It's fine. Just a rough day." We talked for a few more minutes. She talked about some everyday trivia, about how she missed me, how she wanted me to come over. I barely listened, mechanically answering yes and uh-huh. But something in her voice, in that casual concern, made me put the pills away. When we finished talking, I sat in the dark, feeling devastated. I couldn't do this, not today, not after hearing my mother's voice. As much as I wanted to end my suffering, I couldn't inflict that kind of pain on my parents. But what was left for me? Continue this miserable existence? Hide from the world, hating myself and everyone around me? The days after discharge from the hospital merged into an endless string of pain and despair. Physical pain was a constant companion. The scars on his face burned like fresh wounds. Every movement resonated with pain in his ribs, which were still healing from the accident. But worst of all was the phantom pain. I could feel it where my old face had once been. Sometimes at night I would wake up feeling like my skin was on fire, melting, dripping off my bones. I screamed and grabbed my face, but under my fingers I felt only rough scars. The doctors prescribed painkillers, but I was afraid to take them. The fear of addiction haunted me. Instead, I endured, gritting my teeth, sometimes biting my lip bloody, trying to distract myself from the throbbing pain in my face and body. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional agony. Every morning I woke up with the hope that it was all just a nightmare. And every morning, reality came crashing down on me with renewed vigor. I lay in bed, unable to bring myself to get up and start the day. Why? What was waiting for me in this world that no longer accepted me? I avoided mirrors, but sometimes I would accidentally catch my reflection in a window or in the screen of a turned-off TV. Each time it was like a blow under the breath. The man looking back at me from there was a stranger. His disfigured face, his blackened eyes. It couldn't be me. But it was me, and the realization of it hurt almost physically. I lay awake at night, replaying in my head the events that had led up to this nightmare. I remembered every second of that fateful trip. What if I had left a minute later? What if I had taken a different road? These what-ifs haunted me, keeping me on my toes. I tried to get back to work, but I couldn't. Colleagues tried to be kind, but I could see the shock and pity in their eyes. I couldn't concentrate on business, constantly feeling the stares. Eventually, I took an indefinite leave of absence. Another part of my old life, lost forever. My parents tried to help. They came every day bringing food, trying to get me to talk. But their concern only made my pain worse. I could see how hard it was for them to look at me, how they tried not to flinch when looking at my face. Their love was genuine, but it choked me. I couldn't stand their pity, their attempts to pretend everything would be okay. Nothing would ever be okay. Never. Gradually, I began to drift away from everyone. I stopped answering the phone, didn't answer the door. The world shrank to the size of my apartment, but even here I couldn't find peace. Every object reminded me of my old life. The pictures on the walls I couldn't bring myself to take down. Lane's mug, still standing in the closet. Her favorite plaid on the couch. These were all shards of a broken dream that dug into my soul, causing new pain. On nights when the silence became unbearable, I turned on the TV. Not to watch, just to hear the voices, to feel that there was still life in the world. But even that was torture. The happy faces on the screen, the stories of love and success, all of it was a mockery of my mangled life. Pain became my only companion. I almost got used to it, almost began to find comfort in it. At least it was real. At least it proved that I was still alive, though at times I doubted whether I could call it life. Days merged into weeks, weeks into months. I didn't keep track of time, didn't mark dates. Why should I? Each day was like the previous one, an endless cycle of pain, despair, and loneliness. I started talking to myself. Sometimes I talked to Lane, imagining she was still here. I begged her to come back, yelled at her for leaving me, apologized for being a burden. The rational part of me realized I was teetering on the brink of insanity, but I didn't care. Insanity seemed almost an attractive alternative to this agonizing reality. One day, after a particularly rough night filled with nightmares and phantom pain, I realized I couldn't go on like this any longer. Something had to change. I couldn't change the past, I couldn't get my face or Lane back. But maybe I could change the future. The thought didn't bring relief or hope. It was simply a statement of fact. Continuing to exist like this was impossible. I had to either find a way to move on with my life or finally give up. I got out of bed, feeling something other than pain and despair for the first time in a long time. It wasn't determination or hope. Rather, it was a desperate desire to escape. From this apartment, from this city, from myself. I walked over to the bathroom mirror, forcing myself to look at my reflection. The scars, the distorted facial features, the empty eyes. It was all me. The new me that I still couldn't accept. You have to leave, I told my reflection. You have to start over. That decision brought no relief. The pain didn't subside, the despair didn't recede. But for the first time in a long time, I had a purpose. Even if that purpose was just to escape. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what I would do. But I knew one thing. I couldn't stay here any longer. In this city, in this apartment, in this life that no longer belonged to me. Perhaps a new place wouldn't heal my wounds. Perhaps the pain would follow me wherever I went. But it was the only way I could see. The only way to move forward, even if that movement was only escape. I started packing, feeling a strange mixture of fear and relief. The unknown was ahead, but it couldn't be worse than the hell I was going through. I would leave. I'm going to start over. And maybe one day, I'll be able to put this pain behind me. Maybe one day I'll be able to look in the mirror and recognize the person who looks back at me. I spent the next few days preparing to leave. I quit my job, canceled my lease, sold most of my belongings. I didn't know where I was headed, but it didn't matter. The important thing was to get away from here, from the memories, from the ghosts of the past. The hardest part was letting my parents know. I couldn't bring myself to meet them in person, so I wrote a letter. I explained that I needed time and space to sort myself out. I promised to keep in touch. I knew it would hurt them, but I hoped they would understand. On the day I left, I walked around the empty apartment one last time. So many memories, so much pain was tied to this place. I walked over to the mirror in the hallway, the only thing I had left behind. The man looking back at me from there was almost unfamiliar. The droopy face, the faded eyes, the scars that seemed to have gotten even deeper. This wasn't the Frank Lane had once loved. This wasn't even the Frank who'd walked out of the hospital a year ago. This was someone new, someone I didn't know yet. I walked out of the apartment without looking back. I got into a cab headed for the airport. I bought a ticket for the first flight out, not really caring about the destination. Sitting in the waiting room, I thought about what I was leaving behind. My old life, my dreams and hopes, the people I loved. It all seemed so far away now, like a dream I finally woke up from. My flight was boarding. I stood up, grabbed my only bag, and headed for the gate. Each step was difficult, as if something was holding me back, not wanting to let me go. As I passed the large mirror in the airport hall, I stopped for a moment. My reflection looked back at me with a mute question. What will I become? What lies ahead of me? Would I ever be happy again? I didn't know the answers to these questions. All I knew was that there was no turning back. Whatever lay ahead, it couldn't be worse than the hell I'd been through. I boarded the plane feeling a strange mixture of fear and relief. As the plane left the ground, I closed my eyes. Goodbye, old life. Goodbye, Lane. Goodbye, old Frank. I didn't know where this journey would take me. I didn't know if I could ever forgive Lane or myself. I didn't know if I could ever love or trust anyone again. But I knew one thing. My story wasn't over. Perhaps the hardest part of it was just beginning. The plane gained altitude, taking me away from everything I knew and loved. Down below, the city grew smaller and smaller, turning into a scattering of lights. Somewhere out there was my old life. Somewhere out there, Lane was probably putting her baby to bed, unaware that at that moment I was leaving her world forever. I thought about how one moment can change an entire life. One turn of the steering wheel, 1 second of inattention, and everything you thought was immutable crumbles like a house of cards. I thought about how fragile our love was, the love Lane and I thought would last forever. How easily it had crumbled in the face of real hardship. Maybe, I thought, true love is a myth. Maybe we're all just clinging to an illusion because the truth is too painful. Maybe there's nothing permanent in this world, nothing you can truly rely on. The flight attendant offered me a drink. I ordered a whiskey, hoping the alcohol would dull the pain and fear that still raged inside. But even the alcohol was no longer providing relief. It only made the pain dull and heavy, like a leaden blanket covering my entire being. I stared out the porthole at the vast night sky. Somewhere out there, in that darkness, was my new home, a new life. But could it really be new? Or would I just transfer my pain and bitterness to a new place? I closed my eyes, feeling fatigue come over me. Maybe in sleep I would find the peace I so desperately sought. Maybe when I woke up I would find that it was all just a nightmare and I was still the same old Frank, happy and loved. But I knew I wasn't. Reality was too brutal, too tangible to be a dream. This was my new life, my new reality. And I was going to have to learn to live in it, whether I liked it or not. The plane flew through the night, taking me into the unknown. And I sat there, immersed in my thoughts, not knowing what was ahead of me, but knowing that the past was behind me forever. Maybe someday I could forgive Lane. Maybe someday I'll be able to forgive myself. But right now, in this moment, flying toward an unknown future, I felt nothing but emptiness and exhaustion. I closed my eyes, allowing myself to sink into a restless sleep. There was a new chapter of my life ahead, a chapter I never planned on writing. But now it was my only reality, and I was going to have to find the strength to live it, no matter how hard it was. The end.